welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. I am so excited to have you. I've known you for a long time, known your brother for a long, long time, and love him, and what a great friend he is. And so I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for asking me. It's always good to talk to you, and I'm always learning from you. So now I feel like extra honored that I get to sit across from you and have a conversation.
Well, I appreciate that at all. Also, so earlier this morning, I received a text from a very good friend of yours, like your brother.
Oh, no.
And he said, see if you can work this in the show. Ask Becky about when she was, I think you were 16, he was 18, or 16, 14, and y'all got arrested.
Did this surprise you, Dr. Kim, to learn this?
Not about him, but about you. And I'm sure you were just tagging along, little sister.
No, I was the conspirator in all of this, and he was just the free ride. So my brother Nils, who Dr. Kim has known for years and years and years, he is also my best friend, but he happens to be like a genius with helping ministries maximize their impact online. So that's, I think, how y'all had initially connected.
And he has, yes.
But my brother and I, we've always been really, really close. And kind of that brother-sister relationship every parent dreams of for their kids. My brother and I, we had that. And it was kind of life was challenging, and it made us come together. But anyways, all that to say, we weren't always really into Christian things. And I was in 8th grade, he was a sophomore, and it was summertime, and my girls actually were just asking me about this yesterday. They were like, Mom, why did you steal stuff? Were your parents just really poor? And I was like, no, I mean, like, our mom didn't have money, but our dad did. And, teenagers rebel. And anyways, so we had a whole shoplifting scheme. And one day we went to a new mall, and I was like shoving things in my Dooney and Burke purse, which is hilarious because it shows you that we didn't need to steal things. I had a Dooney and Burke giant bucket purse. And yeah, we got caught though that day because the mall was totally empty, and Dr. Kim, the full thing, we saw them pointing at us because we had gone to this store, and then we went to a different store. And as we were walking back through, the mall cop and the 579 store owner pointed at us, and then we start running, Dr. Kim.
Oh my God.
The halls of the mall. And then finally we got arrested and only had to spend that one day. But the whole thing, there's pictures of Nils holding the sign. He has fingerprints in the system. Yeah. So that's everybody's fun fact about me and Nils, because they're like, y'all do all this ministry stuff now, but you've also been booked in jail before.
And which is another example of how God uses all of us, because we've all got those things in our past. Oh, that's funny. And I have always admired yours and Neil's relationship from his point of view. Certainly I've heard him talk about it more than you, but yeah, it is a blessing. And even if you have to get arrested with your brother, I mean, It's probably another thing that bonded you together, and a great story to continue to be able to tell.
Totally. Awesome. And now our girls, it's they'll tell their friends, do you know my mom's been arrested? Oh, yeah. Oh my goodness, well, let's not make this the first thing parents hear about me.
Especially since, isn't your mom the one that has this ministry and does all this teaching and stuff?
Right.
Yeah, that's my mom.
Yeah, their parents are totally fine with it coming over because we know she writes Christian things. And then they're like, right. Then my girl's like, yeah, she's been arrested.
Oh, but that was a long time ago. So anyway.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about this book because I'm excited about it. And you started with a chapter on failure, I think, which all of us can relate to.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's hard for us to think about other people feel that way too, to feel like failures. And then just for talking, people look at you, they don't see you as a shoplifter, they see you as a speaker and an author and a ministry leader. So where does failure enter the picture for you?
It's funny that this is the first chapter because we were talking before we started recording. I have the most amazing publisher, but starting a book on failure, they really warned against. They're like, I don't know if this is the best way to kick off a book.
Yeah.
But to me, it felt like the most honest way to start a book, because especially as women, now men can read this book too if you're bold enough to read a hot pink book, but it's written specifically for women. And it's the thing that we all deal with. Even women who feel successful, even women who have accomplished a bunch, deal with failure. Like you had said, someone might look at me and say she's an author and a speaker and she has these 3 kids who are so cute and she's married and she has this house, all these things. And all we see, and that's life, right? We're scrolling on social media and we see everyone's wins. But the truth is, and you and I were talking about this before we hit record, there's so much that feels like failure too. And it's the shame that comes into our lives for the failure and the facade we put on ourselves that we feel like we have to put up with others, with ourselves, even with God, that keep us from having an authentic and true life. And until we can acknowledge, I can't, I haven't. That's the gospel message, right? The gospel message isn't get your stuff together and then God can do something with your life. It's saying, acknowledge that on your own, you're not enough, right? Acknowledge that on your own, you can't. And that's been the process for me that I found the most freedom of just acknowledging I can't, I can't do this. And so failure comes in a myriad of ways in our lives. It can be, I've failed at my marriage, and it could be as small as, I was really disrespectful, or I'm being so critical, or I failed as a parent. Look at all those other parents who are doing all these fun things in this summer with their kids, and I'm just at home yelling at my children. We all have those things, and those failures and how we deal with the failures keep us from moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you made so many good examples because sometimes we think of failure and it's this huge thing, but a lot of time it is the daily things of yelling at our kids or, being short with our spouse or some things and it seems like we just let those weigh us down. We forget about the other nice things we did or good things we did and all that kind of stuff. We just seem to focus on that. Maybe a lot of it's our culture because we want to be perfect. Certainly social media hadn't helped us a lot in that because I always thought there ought to be a social media channel that showed real life, but I don't think people would use it. It's
no.
I want the pictures. I want the 10 pictures before the perfect one. The one when the kids were not doing what you wanted them to do. Those kind of things.
Yeah, and even people who try to be real with it. There's actually an app a lot of kids use now. My girls keep begging me for it, called Be Real. And so it's intended to be real, and it takes a picture, you get an alert and you have 5 minutes to post, and it takes a picture simultaneously of you and what you're looking at. So there's no filters, there's no nothing. It's whatever you're doing in that moment, whatever your life looks like. But still, you're then there's this pressure of, I got to find the best moment in this ordinary moment, it's ruining us as a society to this feeling of I can't live up to what I'm seeing, but what we're seeing is not even real.
Exactly. So we'll never get there. There's always going to be another rung on the ladder. Yeah. And it just becomes this endless thing that just just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And then I think the way it affects us, how we look at ourselves, the whole comparison thing, which I think is probably a lot of it where we feel failure. Like you kind of said, you see, I just yelled at my kids and this mom's at the beach with our kids and aren't they having fun? It's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so we compare. And so I think there's a lot of things that lead to us feeling that feeling of failure.
Yeah.
And when really a lot of it is just real life. It's just life. And somebody told me when I was very young, and it impacted me a lot, that said, if you are following the Lord, then failure doesn't have to be failure because you can take to Him and He'll change things, or He'll help. He'll turn that around, and that really helped me because I think sometimes what I see in people is when we get stuck on failure is when it really takes us down. I think we all are going to have some of those feelings, obviously, things like that. But if we hold on to that and then that becomes our identity, then that really causes problems. And it's kind of like it blocks God.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, now I'm not good enough for him either. Right. And so, And so I think it's letting, like, just taking it back to him every time and letting him, okay, God, what do I need to learn from this? You know, so it doesn't go, and he'll teach us.
Right. And not all failures are actual failures. You know, like they're just kind of part of life. And I'm trying to remember where I heard it recently, but even thinking of like our kids when they're learning to take those first steps. I have one of my best friends, she adopted a baby a year ago and he just turned 1. And on his first birthday, he was holding my little hands and like finding that wobbly balance, you know, and then he'd take like one step and then fall down. And everyone at the party was surrounded us and we were all just like, like we were so proud of him. And what we expect of ourselves is someone God pulls us up and we just start running. And the reality is like Huddy falling wasn't a failure. It was a part of the process. And we know it enough for him that that's normal. Like, Hudson, you're going to fall 1,000 times before you take 12 steps in a row, right? And we can cheer Hudson on, but for some reason for ourselves, when we like lose our balance and fall, we're like, ugh, I failed again. I must not be able, this must be a closed door, or this must be something that I'm not supposed to do. That is something that analogy of seeing a child and how God sees us has been really healing for me of, Becky, these aren't even failures. This is just part of the journey. And how can you show yourself some self-compassion to realize it's just part of it? Like, it's just part of it.
I love the analogy of a little child learning to walk, because that's such a picture we can all relate to. And yet I think it's hard for us to see ourselves as that child and realize, you know, you give a lot of grace to a child and you're excited and, you know, knowing the failures are going to lead to walking and running and all those other things. And then now we have to chase them before. Why aren't you crawling again? You know, but we do love that. And it's such a good analogy. Just to think about that of oh my gosh, that's how we need to see ourselves in those situations, and knowing God's there cheering us on, helping us, meeting us in the middle of what we see as failure, when he may just see that as, no, this is a step I need you to take to get where I want you to be. That's so good. So let's kind of switch over to, I think, the third part of the book. You write about first love God, second yourself, and then love others. Why is it important to love ourselves before we love others?
Yes. Well, Dr. Kim, you're pulling out the most debated parts of the book. The two things that the publisher really pushed back on, starting with failure. And then the second one was this loving yourself. You're going to get a lot of pushback from it. And I have actually gotten a lot of pushback, because what we have been told in the church, and I just say church like general Christian culture, is we love, like, the greatest commandment is love God, love others, right? Like, we see that and hear that all the time. But the truth is that verse says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I spent some time with a counselor. I spend some time with a counselor every week, but last year I was with my counselor and she was really digging into me on this whole self-love concept. And I pushed back on it so much, because we're told as Christians, die to yourself. Your heart is evil above all else. Like, these are kind of some of the things that we're trained and taught as Christians. And as I was working through therapy with her, I also came across the greatest command. And I was like, man, I've always said it, right? Like, love your neighbor as yourself. And I've never put into like the order of that. Well, I can't love my neighbor until I have the model of loving myself. And it's that analogy we've all heard before of you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's it, right? So in reality, it's not love God first, love others second. I think what that verse is saying, and I'm willing to be wrong, is love God first always. And it's not even like an order. It's just like not even a hierarchy, just a all encompassing, but love God completely. And then you have to love yourself so that you can also love others. And so that's where we have one chapter on loving God, one chapter on loving ourselves, and one chapter on loving others. Is we can't love other people until we know how to love ourselves well. But for women especially, I would say men also deal with this, but in that chapter, I really deal with women. We are like that airplane on the airplane, you know, when the flight attendant is always like, hey, put your oxygen mask on first before you help your children. And what we typically do if the plane is crashing is we want to know, not only do our children have oxygen mask on, but hey, row 22D, do you have your mask on? And 37A, make sure you get your mask on. And then we're like dying because we've forgotten to put our own mask on. And I am learning, and it is a hard lesson to learn because, and I think in many ways it's because of the church. I've been told, die to yourself. Yourself is evil. Your heart is evil. Like, we spend so much time dying to ourselves that we think that there's no value to ourselves. And it's not. So I'm having to rewire my brain of, no, like God loves you. He created you in his image and has called you to this great purpose, and you're his beloved child. Yes, we all have things that we want to correct. Just like going back to the analogy of a child, if Hudson is going to reach out to something that's sharp or dangerous, we're going to say, no, and pull him away because that's what a good loving person does. But at the end of the day, like, we are loved children of God. And so how can we love ourselves? What does that look like? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Kim? As a counselor?
I totally agree with you. And I don't know that, I just feel like, yes, I mean, I think it's no doubt loving God first because he equips us then to do the other things, to love ourselves and to love others. And I think the more we see ourselves through his eyes, yes, we're fallen, yes, we're sinful, all those kind of things, but he sees us and loves us despite that. And I think that was so freeing to me to realize, I think a lot of times going to church, you think, well, I got to get cleaned up before I can come to God, or I've got to, I got to quit doing this, I got to quit listening to that kind of music, and I've been smoking behind the house or whatever, and I got to quit doing all these things before I can come to God. And then you realize, no, you come right. And I think that's the greatest example is the thief on the cross. I mean, this guy had done nothing. We don't know all his story, but he's on a cross for doing something pretty bad. Right. And yet at that point, he reaches out to Jesus and he says, come with me, be with me in paradise today. And so I think the more we love God, the more we're able to love others. But I feel that way too. If I am not feeling good about myself, if I'm not caring for myself and loving myself and staying in tune with God, I don't do a very good job with other people. Yeah. Because I think that's where I become selfish. I get caught up in myself and all my own crud. And so I don't think it's being selfish to love yourself. I think it's what you do with that love then. How did you, okay, God loved me. God really loves me, and I can love myself with all the failures and all the other stuff going on. And then it's like, okay, then I can love you too. Because, and so I totally agree with you. And I can see people arguing it the other way. From my perspective and as a counselor, I just agree with you. I think we've got to love God, then ourselves, and then others. And it's just for me, it's a natural progression. And I think I've seen this in other people who just didn't love themselves, and that all that they felt inside came out against people in their lives, and sometimes the people that they cared about the most. And once they began to see God's love and know it was okay to love themselves and their failures did not define them, that God defined them, then it freed them to love others in a way they never could without that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard to do it. Like, it's hard. It's a constant rewiring to do. And my counselor had made me, when she was introducing this self-love concept to me. And one of the things she had me do one week is she goes, I want you to write in your journal everything that isn't loving towards yourself, like every thought, like just keep a journal with you and record it. And so I did. Or she had me do it for one day, not for a week, one day. And so I like wrote out each of the things like that were kind of not loving towards myself.
Yeah.
And then I had to bring that in. That was like my homework. And then she said, okay, now your homework that we talked through then, okay, here are some negative thoughts. And that day it was stuff like, I woke up late. And so because I woke up late, I didn't get to spend time with the Lord that day. Yep. And I'm a failure for that. I've disappointed God. And then it was like a stream of things, right? Like then my kids woke up late and then I yelled at my kids because like they just didn't pick up their stuff at the bottom of the stairs. And how many times do I have to ask them to take it to their room? And then I was late for a meeting because I was late dropping the kids off. And it was like 1,000 things that just kept spiraling, right? That are so small. And she said, now I want you to ask yourself, like, what would a loving friend say to you about this? Because we can't all say, like, what would a loving father? Because a lot of us don't have like a loving father that we can have that voice of God in our head.
Sure.
So instead, what would like your very best friend say about this situation? So then I had to rewrite the script of, okay, my best friend would say, yes, I missed my time with the Lord last week. Or yesterday too. Actually, I've gone 5 days in a row without sitting down for Bible study. Becky, play some worship music. Like hit a reset button. You're okay. God loves you. You don't have to have it perfect. And yes, I totally get it. I yell at my kids every time like things work on this. Maybe today, like when you pick your kids up, go get a Sonic drink and just have a repair moment and apologize for losing your cool, but then talk to them about what you could do better. And oh, by the way, drink some chamomile tea because that helps me when my throat's sore from yelling. Like that's what a really trusted friend would say to you. And it's not letting you off the hook for things that were sinful or wrong or bad in a moment, but we don't need to sit there, right? We don't need to sit there in shame and condemnation. And we're trying to like punish ourselves and to make amends for something that we think is unforgivable. And that's keeping us from moving forward to the life God has for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just think we just can get stuck in that pattern. And then I love what your counselor told you about getting that different perspective of what would your friend say to you? Because I think, I've had number of pastors over the years that I've counseled with that I'll say, don't you teach your people to love themselves or something like that? And they go, yeah, but it's hard for me. It's something that I think we can all struggle with.
Yes.
And yet I think it's something we continue to let God work in us and let His Spirit work too. Because I don't think He wants us to go through our lives beating ourselves up. I just don't think that's because I think in some ways the enemy wins then.
Yes.
Because you're really seeing yourself like the enemy wants you to see yourself as opposed to how God wants you to see yourself. Because when we see ourselves as God, we're productive and we're doing things for the kingdom. And we're looking at people through different eyes with empathy and all those kind of things. So I think it's just so important that we give ourselves the permission and let God come in and show us how to love ourselves. And because most of us don't know how to do it really well. Some people do, but we really don't. And we do need God's help in that. And really it's just seeing ourselves through His eyes, I think, more and more.
Agreed. But it's hard. It's hard to do it. It's hard to see yourself that way because and it's easy to see others in that same light, but hard to see ourselves in that light. But that's why it's so important and we also feel like as Christians, things of God should just come naturally. Like if we're really a Christian or if we really love God, these things should just come naturally. And it's like nothing comes naturally. Everything we have to work at and work towards. And so, I think it's just constantly learning to, how can I give myself grace? And even though I wrote a book on it and have a whole chapter on it, I'm still daily practicing that. Like, that's one of the things we were talking about before we even started recording. Like, even with now this book, having to give myself grace. And now my kid's home during the summer, giving myself grace. Like, I am actively learning this. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Two steps forward, 1 step back. Progress, not perfection.
I guess it's going to be the rest of our lives. I don't know till, we go to heaven or Jesus comes back. I mean, I think it's just because of our culture, of what we live in, and our humanness.
Yeah.
Our kids kids continue to irritate you, and they don't pick up their clothes, or they don't, and you think, well, I mean, I know now as a counselor that that's not important. The things that are important to us for them to do are not important to them. And so, that's not going to be a priority until they, it's a story I get so many times from parents, their kids grow up and they're having, the room's the worst thing in the world. They find, things that are moldy in their bedroom and stuff like that. And then their daughter or son gets married and they go to their house and it's like, okay, you got a maid 24/7. What is the deal there? They all the stuff you taught them that they wouldn't do at home that they do once they get out on their own. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah,
it's so funny. Let's take one of these into marriage. How does failing to love yourself affect a marriage? How does it impact a marriage?
Well, you could probably answer this better than me, but I can speak for myself as someone who's not like a marriage expert, but I am an expert on my own, on my own marriage. Failing to love myself a couple of ways. One, I would say failing to love myself I will say physically, and then I will say emotionally. When I'm not, we'll start with the emotion one. When I'm not taking care of myself, when I'm not practicing self-love, when I'm not prioritizing that time with the Lord, the time with friends, things that refill my heart and soul, I'm not able to show up to Chris as my best self, right? Instead, I'm showing up to him either faking it till I make it, like pushing through, which never ends good because then I burn out and explode. Or I'm depleted, right? I'm tired all the time. I'm cranky. I'm snippety, or I'm overspending to try to compensate something that I'm feeling in my own life. The other thing I would say that I struggle with a lot is not taking care of loving myself physically. So one thing I've really struggled with, and this is something I'm trying to hit the reset button on right now, is the way I'm constantly putting air mask on everybody else, taking my girls to all these physical activities, making sure that they're eating their meals and that their water bottles are filled as I'm chugging coffee to try to keep up with the pace.
Yeah.
And because of that, like, I'm not as strong as I used to be. I've put on more weight, and how that affects my marriage isn't that he loves me less because my body looks different, but I feel less energy. I feel like I feel less confident when we have intimacy time. All of it then affects my marriage because I'm not positioning myself in the best possible way, not even from a looks perspective, although that matters too. It's how is it making me physically feel? And it's pulled back, it's withdrawn, it's less energy, less confidence. So I would say those are 2 big ways that I've struggled in marriage of when I'm not loving myself, it drastically impacts our marriage. But instead, I feel like I do the oxygen mask in reversal of like, well, we got to get these things done and I got to get my work done, but then the house has to get clean and the kids have to go here. And I know Chris really loves it when this is done. So I'm going to do this before he gets home. And then he gets home and I'm like, ugh, I'm so tired and I'm done. So I would say those are some of the examples for my marriage where I've struggled the most.
I don't think guys struggle as much with the physical or bodies as women. I think that's a lot of that's our culture. I see guys that, they've got the biggest beer belly in the world and they think they're God's gift to women, it's like,
Yes.
but I think our culture is so hard on women, and
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to buy into that instead of just, I think part of loving yourself in a marriage for a woman is to see that God created you perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And you're the perfect person for the man he gave you in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes a wife your husband will tell her how beautiful she is, how wonderful she looks, and she doesn't receive it from him because she doesn't feel that way himself. And I think that's a way that it affects a marriage, because when I tell Nancy that how beautiful she is, or how good she looks today, or how cute she looks in that outfit, I want her to believe that. I don't want her to kind of go, well, you're my husband, you're supposed to say that. I said, no, I'm saying it. My pastor said something probably 8 or 9 years ago that really stuck with me. And he said, if you think it, say it. If you think those nice things about your spouse or someone else, say them. And so I do. And then I think I just see at times it's hard for her to receive those things. And I think it's just hard for a number of women, I think. And I think, I don't know what, I think as husband, I would say, I said, you keep saying it, you keep telling them. And because, well, one, if she's going to hear that, I want her to hear it from me first, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, I hopefully that she believes that and is able to see, really, well, I've got a husband that loves me. I know God loves me. I can love myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I ask you a question about the self-love in marriage? So for a lot of women that I know, in their marriages, their husband's passive, their husband's not the kind of husband like where you were talking about, of like telling her beautiful and you want her to believe it. They're not hearing that from their husband. They're withdrawn, or they're temperamental, sometimes with the kids, temperamental and like overreactive, irritated with kids, and those kinds of things. So for self-love, what does that look like then? How do women love themselves when the church is saying, like, be submissive and honor your husband? And so they take on the dying to self of like, I'm just not going to say anything or do anything. Would it be better in a self-love mindset to like stand up more, not in an abrasive way, but would it be good for women like loving themselves to, like, how does a woman love herself when she's in not a marriage like yours, but in a marriage where she feels, I'm committed to this man and I love him. I don't like him a lot right now. But I love him. And how does a woman love herself well in that time when the circumstances aren't ideal?
Yeah. And I think those are such difficult situations. And I think that's where, when we, obviously, I always put it, husbands always ask me, why are you so rough on me? And I said, well, I kind of think that's the way God made it. I think we are the leader. We are the one who's supposed to be doing those things. And so if we're not, then I think it does. But the things you said, it affects our wives that way, because we are the ones they need to hear those things from. We are the ones who need to say, hey, can I do anything to help you today? And those kind of things. And so if a wife is in that, I think for herself, I think what I would say, you really lean into God, and you really lean into who he is and how he feels about you, and learn everything you can about that. And don't let what your husband does or doesn't do define you. I know that's hard because you're living with this person and you're with them every day. And then I think too, yes, I agree with you. I think it's having that conversation, and it's not when you're upset or mad. It's say, hey, there's some things I've really been thinking about. Can we sit down and talk about it? And hopefully he will. And if he won't, then maybe it's like, hey, I think our marriage could be better than it is. I could be a better wife. I think you could be a better husband. Will you go to counseling with me? And he may say no. But what I tell a woman, then go for yourself. Go for yourself, and hopefully that some of the things that you learn there, maybe he'll see some differences, whatever it is, and he'll join you in counseling. And so it's not an easy fix at all. And he's gotten in that habit. And, that's maybe what he had modeled in his home, and maybe what his dad had modeled, how far that could go back.
Right.
My feeling is that most men then in those situations, unless somebody's just a narcissist or whatever, that's really what he wants in a marriage. And sometimes he doesn't know how to get there. And so sometimes I think his wife's saying, hey, this could be better than it is. Let's work on this together, and get that. The more I can get a couple to see themselves as a team, what does it take to make you the husband God wants you to be? What's it take to make her the wife God wants them to be? And then let God work in that, and let God teach you how you treat each other. And I think the sooner a wife addresses that, and usually the wife is the one who's going to say it. You're more relational. God created you that way. You pick up on things that we don't, and so I think stepping forward and saying, "I want our marriage to be better than this. I want to be a better wife. I want you to be a better husband, and let's get to work on this." Does that make sense?
Good. Totally. Yeah. And I would say personally, that's exactly where we found ourselves 2 years ago. Chris wasn't unwilling to go, but we had like kind of tried several things. And I was like, I need to be in counseling. Like there's stuff I need to work on. And I was in counseling for a solid year before he started. And a lot of it was like, for him, it was that self-love that he was struggling with, to love himself, to validate, like, okay, I'm going to spend this money that we don't have to go to counseling. And once he joined, but what he saw was in a year, things weren't affecting me the same way. And I wasn't a pushover either. It was simply, I wasn't losing my cool as much with the kids, or when he was acting a certain way, I would put up boundaries and not get on the roller coaster with him. And I'd step away with it, where before I might have, really reared up, or I would have just completely shut down. And he saw me change, so he wanted that. And then he joined counseling. And just a couple of months ago, we now are starting together. But it's because we both have done the independent work. We're seeing, not perfect at all, but we're seeing more fruit come from counseling, because we're coming from a place of, we both have done the work. But I did have to go first. I was in counseling for, I think, a year and a half, maybe a solid year, before he was willing to try himself too. And that's hard, because as a woman, you're like, I want the man to lead this, and I want him to do this. And I was done waiting, and I wanted it to be healthy. And I knew Chris did too, but sometimes it just takes a different partner to go first. And for this one, it was more important that I just get going and try and do something.
Yeah, and I think hopefully as Chris saw that, then he was able to come. And I think that typical thing that happens a lot, where the wife goes. And I think what you did, going to work on yourself, get better, you weren't going so you could bash Chris for an hour each week. And what about this horrible person I'm married to? Can you give me some new ways to torment him, or or something like that? No, you were going for yourself. And then I think Chris, then he started out for himself, and then you come together. Now, there's nothing wrong with if you'd both started together day one. That'd been great.
Yes. So good.
But the fact that you ended up there, and probably were healthier going into that, to work on your marriage together, work for you guys. That's really
and
good.
I share that only, just like you said, yes, if your spouse is willing to go at the same time, then I say start as soon as you can. But if you're in a situation like I was, where you're at a dead end and you're just kind of wanting them to take the first step, you can take the first step. Like women, we can step and say, no, I can do something about this. And it did help me, even if nothing else changed. Like, had the circumstances been different and he never joined, I'd be 2.5 years into counseling, and I'd still be a stronger, better person because of it, and able to love myself, my kids, him better because of the work that I'm doing. So I agree with you. If you can go together, go together. If not, take that first step.
Take that first step. That's so good. I think that all goes back to, the more we can take care of ourselves, help ourselves, it's going to make, the best marriages are two healthy people.
Yes.
And sometimes one's healthy and others, sometimes one healthy and one not. Yes. But if we're working to get ourselves healthy, our marriage is going to benefit from it. For sure. Yeah. For sure. We talked about the different ways to, what it looks like to love yourself. Anything you'd add on that? Anything biblically that you think that we didn't talk about?
From a biblical perspective, I would say the best way I love myself from a spiritual component is prioritizing that time with the Lord, but again, in a really self-love way. So not like our culture can be very much like a check the box of, I'm going to read the Bible in a year. And if I get off track by a week, I failed and I'll start again next year. Or I'm going to join the Bible study at my church and I'm a week behind. So I failed and I'm not good at that. Instead, I would really learn, what does just walking with God look like? So some days for me, that is, I do get an hour at the table with my Bible and my journal and my coffee, and it's hot the whole time. And other days it's, I'm listening to music as I go, or I'm just praying with God after dropping off kids and on my way home. Like, I would just encourage women, like, find a really healthy way to have a healthy relationship with God that's not rooted in achievement, that's not rooted in this checklist that we've kind of been trained of, like, okay, I need to do this, 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 and then I have a good relationship with God. Instead, what does a healthy relationship with God look like? It's find those things that work for you. Like maybe it's going for a walk every day and you don't play music, but you just listen and you ask God to show you what's true about you or what's true about him. It's listening to music in your house, or maybe you listen to an audiobook that does bad things for your heart and your mind. And instead you just listen to music and see what God speaks to you from that. Maybe instead of scrolling on your phone for 30 minutes, you say, I'm going to actually not get on social media until I've spent time in the Word that day. And so some days that means you're not on social media at all. Other days that means you did Bible study and then later you're looking at social media while your kids are having a play date. So I think finding ways to, in a really grace-filled, real way, what does it look like to commune with God? And as we have that relationship with God, everything else gets clear, right? Like then we know, because we have we're in tune with the Spirit. We know what the Spirit sounds like, that we then know how to respond better in our marriage. We are happier. We're more joy-filled. We're more patient. We know who we are and we don't question everything. We don't take everything else so personally because we're already down in the dumps. Instead, we have a greater security. So I would say find your relationship with God. And I think that I'm learning there's freedom in that, right? We have freedom and to let that evolve with time and circumstances and all of that.
That is so good. Because I think a lot of people grew up in church and there's that little checklist in the back of the pew of how many times you read your Bible this week. Did you read, and so I think it's easy for us to get in that checklist mentality about our relationship with God. And I loved you describe it. It's really just leaning in and learning more about him and how he cares for us and letting him really kind of walk us through that. I mean, the Spirit's going to guide us. Yeah, I love the way you put that. So good. Striving. What did that look like in your life? And because I think we all get caught up in that, like we're talking about. But what did that look like, and can we stop it? And because we got things that go on, we've got things we got to do every day, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So how do you look at that?
Yeah. So striving is that's one of those things where I think, at least for me as a woman, I visualize myself as like that hamster on a wheel where you're just like going really, really fast. But then you look up, you're like, I've gone nowhere, but I'm exhausted. That's kind of when I wrote, the tagline of the book is actually How to Stop Striving and Live Purposefully and Abundantly. Yeah. And so that word striving to me was actually really important. And we talk about that all throughout the book that's where so many of us feel that we are doing all these things. And then it's like Groundhog Day, where like the next day's the same and we're just like running this race. And so what does it look like to say, I'm going to actually get off this hamster wheel? I don't have to, I can go explore the tunnels in my cage, or I can get out of the cage and run around and so for me, the striving, it's an intentional choice to just sit down, and all throughout the book, it's really made to be like I'm a life coach of a coaching session where we are sitting down and evaluating, okay, what works, what doesn't. There's a chapter where we look at all of our spinning plates. And I actually have 2 pages filled with plates, and we identify what are all these spinning plates. And then I share all these stories of where God had showed me to identify my spinning plates and to determine, hey, which ones are broken and need to just be donated and given away? Which ones were meant to be paper plates that are thrown away after using them? Which ones are fine china that are special but aren't everyday? And which ones are your everyday plates that are part of life? And when you kind of properly order your plates, then you know, okay, I'm striving after things that should have been trashed years ago. Or I'm striving after something that's not for me anymore. And I need to Marie Kondo it, thank it for it, and move on.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge evaluation for me, and that I would encourage a lot of women to do is, how are you striving? And what are some of those things you're striving for that are in your lane that you need to strive after way more? Like really work after, and ask yourself, do I need to give more value to this? And if so, how do I prioritize me? How do I prioritize that? But then what are some other things you need to say no to? Like maybe you're not supposed to be room mom. Like you're doing that because you think you should, there's a need for it, or maybe you don't need a volunteer for in the 2nd grade class at your church anymore. Or in reverse, maybe you serving in the kids ministry is going to be so life-giving, and you say yes to that, but then you say no to room mom, or you say no to, I don't know. We all have 1,000 plates that we need to, the way we stop striving is we start saying no to things, even good things, and we learn to prioritize all the things in our life.
No, that's so good. I love the plate analogy because I think that gives a real visual of, okay, let's get rid of these paper plates. You know, what do we do with these different things? Because I think it's a lot of times we spend a lot of time and energy on things that probably need to be on the throwaway plates. And we don't even realize it. Maybe it's because we thought we're supposed to. Like you said, okay, well, my mother was always homeroom mother of every grade all the way through whatever. And I need to do the same thing. And yet I'm better off if I volunteered to maybe just do this at the school or something else, or, do something for my kids different. And to me, if I'm, and there's certainly things we do need to do and have to do just because that's where we are in life or whatever's going on.
Right.
But the things that I can have some control over, if it's a drain all the time and not energizing, and I don't feel like it's really been profitable, and yet I just keep doing it, I mean, then it's time to look at things again, I think. And I think sometimes I think sometimes we're too tired to look at it. And even though it's not going well, we just think, but I don't have time to rethink this.
Or it takes more work to transition. So one thing, Chris and I, we moved into a new house a couple years ago that was bigger than our last house. And at our last house, we were really fortunate enough with my work money, we were able to have a housekeeper. But when we moved to the new house that was a little bit bigger, the housekeeper that was already a little bit of a stretch to justify now became impossible. Like we could not afford it with the extra space. So when we first moved in, the girls were dancing competitively. So they were at the dance studio 20 hours a week. Man. I took on myself of cleaning this house by myself because Chris has a real, quote unquote, real full-time job, even though I have full-time hours. Mine's a bit more flexible, and my girls were going to school and then at the studio. So I didn't want to burden them with like, when we're home, then I just want to be a family, not clean your room, da, 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 da. Yeah. And I was getting really burned out. And so this past year, at the beginning of this past school year, I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so we have spent the past year really training our kids, and they have all these chores that they have to do now. But Dr. Kim, it has been a year of really training and getting them and teaching them, like, this is how you vacuum. This is how you properly clean a toilet. This is how you load dishes in a dishwasher. This is how, if you want to, we have extras too, where like they can wipe baseboards or clean windows downstairs. Like, so there's all these different things that they can do and that they have to do. And But that's taken time, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
it has taken a year. My oldest learned quickly, but my youngest, who's 8 or just turned 9, we're still having to train her, right? Like it's taking a lot of time. And in some ways it would be easier, but it's not. Like already it's like, okay, this has gotten way better, but it took a year of training to get to the point where I'm no longer striving.
I love that. And I love the fact that you took the time to train them, because sometimes I think, okay, you need to go clean the bathroom. Well, they're not going to clean the bathroom like it needs to be cleaned, or they're not probably going to vacuum. They're certainly going to miss spots, or maybe you vacuum under those chairs because you can move them easy and they don't, so that I love the fact that you took the time to train them. It did take time, but now you're reaping the benefit of it. And you're giving something to them too. They may not jump up and down every time you say it's time to do cleaning.
They definitely don't.
but I do think someday they're going to come back, and it may be when they have their own families, and they're going to say, "Thanks for teaching me those things."
And they may never thank me, but their future roommates and spouses will.
Absolutely.
Yes. A year later, it is still like, no one has to do what we have to do. Like it is still like the worst thing of their life, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, you and Chris are the worst parents in the world. I mean,
we are. We've definitely been told that.
Oh, I know. But, that every kid says that no matter what we do as parents, know. Yeah, I got a pic. We were at a deal the other day, and my 14-year-old granddaughter was standing next, and her dad came up to her and just kind of being silly. And Mike snapped the picture at the perfect time when she's eye rolling him. And it's just, she looked at things. She said, she just laughed when she saw it. I said, "Do you do that a lot?" She said, "Oh yeah, I know I do."
I bet it's so fun now from the grandparent perspective to watch it happen to your kids. Even though you love your kids, you're like, you had it coming.
It is. It's so much fun, and they're all doing great, and the kids are all doing really good. Thank God.
That's awesome.
And but there's normal things that kids. I've told parents all the time. There's some things that they're normal going to drive you crazy. I mean, but that's just part of them growing up, and you just kind of got to learn to roll with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's good. So this has been such a good conversation. What would you hope that the people that are listening would take away from our conversation today?
My biggest hope is my takeaway that I hope you've heard too is give yourself grace, give yourself time. And from a marriage perspective, not be afraid to go first, like whether it's the husband listening right now or the woman listening right now, that you just say, because I think most people aren't in equal opportunity marriage, meaning most people, like that's marriage. That's the hard part about marriage is when one is in a good space, the other one inevitably is in a hard space. And so if you're the one seeing, quote unquote, seeing things maybe more clearly right now, go first. Like invest in yourself, love yourself well, and don't just check out. Like it is not hopeless. You are not hopeless. Like your marriage may take time in the same way my kids cleaning is still taking time. But give yourself grace in that. Like let's not lose the fight, even if you feel like you're going into the fight by yourself right now. So, and you're not alone in it, and it's not just you, even though social media makes you feel that way.
Absolutely. And I think too, for most women, they do usually have close friends they can talk to, but I think you do need somebody that you can kind of share with it, so you don't think you're the only one out there.
Yeah.
And they're saying, "Oh yeah."
And then you have somebody who's your close friends will be more defensive of you. And that's good to have, right? Like it's good to have safe people you could talk to in an honoring way about your marriage. But it's really healthy to have someone who will sit across from you and help model self-love and compassion, but also help you guide you through the parts that you can fix in yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. We talked about some of the struggles you and Chris had. What are you loving about your marriage today?
I feel like we have been in the hardest season of our marriage, but I also feel like we are getting into the healthiest part of our marriage of I'm loving that we're in counseling together. So, which is a weird thing to say.
No.
Like, when I think of the thing I love most right now, it is really, really good to go to counseling because she is helping us see in ourselves what we appreciate the most about each other, but also just bringing in a different perspective has been so good to be like, oh, I didn't even realize that's why you're doing this way, or that's why you're defaulting to this reaction. So I guess it's a weird thing to say, but the thing I'm loving most about my marriage right now is that we're in counseling together and what we're learning about each other and our marriage from it.
Well, as a counselor, I think that's a great thing to love about your marriage.
Yeah.
I think the fact that you are in, and that, like we talked about, like you started, and I have one lady that I love, but she was recommended to come to me 8 years before they did, and over and over she said, I don't know why we didn't do it back then. So if you're feeling that, it's definitely worth it. I mean, I think you and Chris are living testimony to that it can make a difference, and it just I don't have anything magical, but I think just having someone look at it from a little bit different perspective, and then able to help you see some things that maybe are right in front of you, but they just haven't seen, or maybe some things that you've said to Chris, but he had never heard, and then the counselor says it, and it's like, oh, okay, I do that with parents and kids all the time. They'll say, well, what'd you say to them? I said, whatever I said. And they go, I tell them that all the time. I said, I know, but I'm not their parent.
But it was you, and it was me. You.
Exactly. So that's really good. Well, I'm excited, too, for people to pick up the book. It's called But God Can, How to Stop Striving and Live Purposefully and Abundantly. It is available everywhere, and I would encourage people to pick it up and expand more of what we talked about today. And Becky, it's been so much fun. What a great conversation. It's been great to have you. Thank you for saying yes and spending time here.
Yes, thank you for asking me.
You're welcome. Have a great day.